Hi, everybody. It's great to be here today, albeit remotely. However, hopefully we'll be back to normal soon. So, given this is indeed the new normal, it's something that I want to touch on today in the context of digital resilience. So, over the past few months, we've all been trying to find routines that work for the family, parents grappling with isolation or working from home or teaching their kids and keeping them entertained and connected. Um, and we know all of this has involved technology. So in terms of what we've seen, screen time usage by kids was up around 50% at the start of the first COVID lockdown, with homeschooling driving up use across the world, unsurprisingly. Now, pre-lockdown evidence, of course, suggests that the more time spent online, the greater risk of harm. So the notion of digital resilience in many ways has never been more pertinent. So what I want to do is I want to kind of start by looking at some of what of those risks are. I think the first thing to look at is increased screen time, right? Because parents have had to loosen up rules with regards to how much time kids spend in front of their tablets, in front of their computers. This has led, unsurprisingly, to kids becoming more dependent on their screens. Now, as children become more active online, the possibility and probability that they'll be exposed to issues that are problematic increases. So it's important to understand what they could face and get them to prepare them to deal with that in this context. Secondly, cyberbullying. With more children socializing and sharing their day-to-day lives on social networks, there, of course, is an increased risk that they'll be exposed to different forms of cyberbullying. And, I'm going to go into cyberbullying a bit more later, but we know that during lockdown, the idea that everything happened online in a way that, pre-lockdown, one could argue, well, yes, still kids played online and, hung out online, but this was everything. It was learning, it was playing, it was connecting. So that was a bigger risk. Identity and body image. We've been doing some work with Internet Matters, and one of the things that kept coming up with kids that to a large extent came out from this sort of very connected year and a half they've had online is the fact that they began to feel quite self-conscious about the way they looked. So it's one thing taking a picture for Instagram and going through the quite harmful, frankly, digital exercise of editing it and then reposting it. But this kind of being confronted with their faces on screen all the time made them begin to feel very exposed, that they couldn't control it, of how they were seen. And so we saw that body images increased, but also there was an increase in kind of that social anxiety of feeling very much on, which was interesting. Peer pressure. We know that having the right kind of smartphone or tech or being on popular apps, in the same way that back in the day it would be about wearing the right kinds of clothes, right? Here it's about using the right language, which emojis are cool or not cool to use. So this is often very important. We saw this kids saying this was very important in terms of fitting in. Sexting was an issue, so depending on their age, they might be pressured into sending videos and sharing inappropriate images and content online. And finally, inappropriate content, right? So being exposed to sort of stuff that they may not be emotionally mature enough to process. So currently, there is no long-term evidence that we have for the impact of how this particular pandemic that happened in the past 18 months has affected our children. But I think what we do know is that it's important to focus on the things that we can be doing to support them in the here and now. So that's why I think it's critical to look at digital resilience. Right, so what is resilience? Well, let's clarify what we mean by that first. Resilience is not about reaching a point that we're so kind of hard and efficient that nothing can impact us. Rather, it's the ability to face setbacks, but critically recover from them, right? To feel angry or sad, but to know that you have the tools to deal with those feelings. So when we speak of digital resilience, in fact, what we're speaking about is bouncing back from the difficult times online. Now, depending on a child's emotional and cognitive development, they'll be faced by different challenges. So obviously, each of these areas will be age specific, right? The resilience that you want to instill in a 5-year-old that's using their tablet to watch Peppa Pig safely is, of course, very different to the resilience you want to instill in a 15-year-old who's using Instagram. However, there are some key themes that in many ways transcend age and life stage. So let's take a moment to look at these. And what we'll do then is sort of break down into life stages what's important. I think the first one, and I think your previous speaker spoke about this beautifully in the Q&A, was consistent messaging. Speak about boundaries clearly and often. Psychologists call this the broken record technique. So in many ways, kids need to hear something over and over again to see its value, to understand that this is a non-negotiable. So think of what the message is. So in terms of I need you to be safe online. So these are the rules of the family. You need to be aware of privacy measures. You need to be aware of how much time you spend. Whatever the message is, speak about it consistently, speak about it often. If there's two parents in the household, the message should come from them both. The second thing that I think is vital across the lifespan is critical thinking. As well as doing a lot of work in the online world, I do a lot of work on objectification and sexualization. And one of the things that I would often do with my little girl with critical thinking was get her to think about the images she was being exposed with. So if we were watching, I don't know, a hypersexualized music video, for example, she came across something, I'd say, well, that's interesting. All the boys are dressed, but the girls seem to be kind of undressed. Do you think they're a bit cold? Do you think they might want a little cardigan? I was trying to kind of in one way be funny, but another way try and make her think, what's going on here? If we saw an ad for a lipstick or a mascara and you'd see fake eyelashes, we'd talk about that. So likewise with the online world, someone says they like you. Do you think a double tap, do you think that really means that they really like something? Or do you think they're doing it to get taps, as well? Well, why do you think someone posted that picture? What do you think they're trying to say about it? What do you think it means if a lot of people like a picture? Can a lot of people like something that's interesting to them, but not so much represents the person on the other side? So I think all of these questions around critical thinking are key. And actually, it's something you can begin at a very early age. Stop. Pause, ask yourself why, think through. And I think this is going to be one of the most important sort of ways to inoculate our kids and kind of ensure that digital resilience, because in terms of kind of keeping them away from things, that's going to be almost impossible. We live in a connected world. They're more connected than ever before, so we need these raincoats, and I think critical thinking is one of the best psychological raincoats, as it were, that you can have. The third thing is feeling protected. Now, again, in the same way as if they were, exploring a new place in the real world, we need to get our kids to ask themselves, when they're on the online world, am I somewhere safe? Kind of, in the same way you would say to them, well, look, before crossing the road, you look for other cars coming by. Well, what happens when they're on a new site? What are the indicators of feeling safe? What do they need to do to watch out for? And when they don't feel safe, when something feels off, well, what are the mechanisms for reaching out and feeling safe? Now, this is kind of an important one because, again, a lot of what our research shows is that many times kids will avoid speaking to parents about feeling unsafe because they fear their tech will be taken away. So having that conversation of, look, I'm on your side here, we're on the same side, we want this to work. We want you to have your tech and want it to work as best as possible. So this is not about you being punished if you stumble on something uncomfortable. This is not about you kind of, having your tech necessarily taken away. This is about me kind of helping you cross that road, me helping you navigate that new situation. So not only, and I think this is key here, when we're talking about feeling protected, this is not only about, hey, how do I find the risks? How do I see and identify the risks? But critically, it's about, once I have identified the risk, what do I do? And the clearer you can be, the better. You speak to an adult, whether it's a teacher, if it's a school or a parent, or if there, in many cases, there are sort of buttons where you can stop and kind of report. You speak to them about that, but they need to have an idea of what to do if, as it were. The other thing that I think is critical here is, how does my identity feed into this. This is an important one because the identity that used to be offline, right? The way that we construct our identities offline is to a much greater extent happening online now. And as a kid, as a consequence, kids are kind of prone to be more vulnerable when considering questions like, what should I look like? What group should I be connected to? How, what language should I use? What represents me? So the idea of a child's identity, of who they are, being in a sense crowdsourced online is potentially really problematic. And how do we go against this? Well, it's about ensuring that you kind of speak to your kids about this. Look, people are going to be really interested when you post this kind of thing, but is that the only thing that represents you? What makes more sense? Let's look at what your friends are posting. Is this all of them? What are the parts that you love about them? So again, going back to those critical faculties, how does identity online and offline feed into the way that they see themselves? Finally, I'd say connect safely. Remember, the minimum age for most social media platforms at the moment is around the age of 13. So think carefully. What are they on? Do they feel pressured to be on something that you don't feel comfortable with? We need to ensure that they're mature enough to kind of be able to work on the platform, to enjoy the platform, to have an effective use of it. So make sure you've reviewed the privacy settings, have a safe profile, and have a conversation with your kids about who they're talking to. We need to stay engaged with their digital life, right? So again, one of the things I often say to parents and teachers when I speak to them, they're like, oh, it's always evolving. It's so difficult to keep on top of it. It's important, therefore, to keep on top of it. I know it's hard, but the more you understand the platforms that they're on, the more you'll be able to understand, what their engagement is and ask questions and talk about it, right? So through that, you're able to not only kind of have that connection with your child, but I think you're also able to show them what being a good digital citizen means, right? You can mirror, you can model the appropriate behavior. In many ways, parenting kids online or teaching kids about the online world, or even with policy about the online world, it's not that different to what we have offline. It's about understanding what the difficulties are, having a sense of progression when it comes to letting go, and having those ongoing discussions, right? I always give the example, none of us put our kids on a two-wheeler bike and told them to go off. They started on a tricycle, and when they got comfortable with that, they got training wheels on a bicycle, and once they got comfortable with that, we held the back of their bike, and only when we thought they could go off on their own did we let go. And that's the same kind of mechanism here, right? So they need to feel empowered over their environment, right? That if things go wrong, they know where the brakes are. They know how to stop the bike. They know how to get off. It's the same thing. Now, like I said, those themes, of course, transcend age and developmental stage, but it's key that, again, we take a child's developmental stage into account when we're supporting them, so we can address the issues that they're most likely to be sort of relevant to them where they are, and sort of support them within those sort of issues. So let's kind of look at sort of really young children, right? So if you think about it, around the ages of 4 to 7, the big issue with kind of tech is how much time are they spending online? We know that little ones, anyone who's had a little one knows that they love repetition, right? So we all have that thing where we read their favorite book at night and it's the same book, or they want the same DVD. But, precisely because repetition is such an easy thing to do online, we need to be able to limit screen time, right? So make sure that, if you're a parent or a teacher, and there's some sort of engagement, that you're in the room when they're watching. Ensure also that they're watching from original sources. Now, we know that in recent years, places like YouTube will take children's cartoons, and then if you put them on a loop, they'll spiral into things that are much more insidious and not age appropriate. So make sure that you're watching from an original source. Make sure that all of their settings on the tablet are set for young children to filter out any inappropriate content. And also, if for whatever reason you've got to do something else and maybe you're not on it as much, so you're not directly watching them, make sure that you have something on your computer that it'll stop. You can do that. There's a lot of apps out there that stop after 20 minutes, 25 minutes, right? Because this stage is very much about safe watching and time limitation, and there's a lot of apps and tools out there to help you. Now, as they get a bit older, so if we kind of move to the ages of like 7 to 10, there is a move from watching just sort of passively to kind of beginning to connect. So, we see them playing on little games, even things like Minecraft, right? Now they're connecting with people digitally for the first time. So the question then becomes, who are they speaking to? Who are they sharing their details with? Do they know how to do this safely? Now, this is a critical period because ideally what we want to have to happen is by the time they get their smartphone when they're 11 or 12, they're already versed in the idea of online safety, of privacy, of communicating effectively. So beware of kind of how you speak to them about this. This needs a proper conversation in the same way that, you would explain, look, if you were meeting someone, you could just hear their, a voice, but not see them. How do you know for sure? If they asked you for information, how would you think about, giving this or not? So being aware of timing and settings, being aware of those great parental controls, and being aware that we participate is going to be key. The more we know about what our kids are doing online, the more likely we are to elicit concerns and help them be a good digital citizen. And finally, I think it's critical here to be assertive. I think many times there's an anxiety. I always say it's funny, everything else that we've done, in our lives, we've done first. We've, driven cars first and cooked first, and then we teach our kids. But the online world, it seems to be flipped. They do things first, and we're kind of playing catch up. And I think as a consequence, there's an anxiety around it. I think there absolutely needs to be that hierarchy of, I'm a parent, these are the rules, and this is how I do it. And that can be done, of course, in a warm, in a caring way, but it needs to feel boundaried so children feel themselves, they know what you expect from them. Now, as we look at older children, sort of from 11 to 13, this is a really interesting time because this is the time that studies show that most kids get their first smartphone, right? And this literally opens up a whole new world. So you need to approach this in the same way. In the same way, when would you let them walk down their street on their own or take a bus on their own? Ask yourself these questions. There needs to be some monitoring. So, we need to start thinking at this age how we hand over their phone, because it's here they're going to start discovering their identities, figuring out which groups they're going to follow or like or join. They're going to start communicating. So that digital footprint, that all important digital footprint that will follow them throughout life is going to be visible for all to see. So when you hand over that phone, you're literally handing over to your child a huge amount of responsibility. And the way to kind of, mitigate the dangers that might come of that is to be able to hand it over slowly, as it were. So, I think in those early days, it's critical here that you have some clear guidelines. For example, the phones, no phones when you're studying. We know, for example, that, being on a phone when someone's studying gets in the way of memory consolidation, right? So no phones when studying, no phones after a certain time at night, because we know it interferes with sleep, no phones at the dinner table because it interferes with communication. In those early stages, you need to be aware of what apps they're on, and be able to look at them. And again, this isn't done with your child, in a way that's sort of punitive. This needs to be done collaboratively. It's sort of you and me are on the same side, and I need to help you, as it were, walk down this new road. So I need to be aware. So all of those things need to be spoken about. The other thing that we know, for example, is that this is the age where most children will stumble onto inappropriate adult content, right? So we know a lot of the kids, a great majority, will stumble on around 11 or 12. Speak to your child, therefore, before a pornographer does. You might have all the safety settings on their phone, but they might be over at a friend's house. They may see something. So as uncomfortable these conversations are, in these sort of early teen years, preteen years, those conversations are critical to have. You will see things that aren't a real representation of what love is, of what relationship is, or what sex is. Try and, I've put these things on your phone, but this is how you've got to be aware of them, and then try not to engage. So you've got to have these conversations critically. And then the other big thing that comes at this age as well, I think, is online bullying. Dealing with it psychologically is critical, but also technologically. So I think the first thing that you need to do is talk about it. If your child's using social media or communicating online, don't wait until they experience cyberbullying to talk about them. Talk about it to them beforehand. And again, talk about sort of the nuances that are online in the way they aren't offline. I remember when my daughter started school and secondary school, and there was a case where a girl shared a picture that all the girls had been in, but she cut out one of the children because it didn't fit in whatever format they had. And the other child obviously felt very upset. And the kid that had cut out the picture felt upset because she didn't mean to bully. The other child felt bullied, and it was a really interesting teachable moment, because I remember sitting with my kid and saying, "Well, look, your friend didn't mean to make your other friend feel bad, but she didn't think it through, and this is how these things happen." So we need to be able to kind of talk about what the expectations are online, thinking about others, and through that, of course, we need to speak to them about being aware of what they share. So they can take the time to reflect on the impact of their comments, and make smarter choices. Again, one of the big sort of taglines we had is, if you're not happy to wear it on a t-shirt across your chest, don't put it online, because that's where it's going to stay. You need to make we need to make our children feel, aware of this digital footprint, of the impact that these words have. I think it's important that we make sure, again, when we hand these phones over, that we take control, set safety filters to ensure privacy settings and everything, around social media, so we can try and mitigate bullying around that. We need to talk regularly, check in, and very importantly, we need to, help children to understand how to block and report. Like I said earlier, teach them what to do if they want to prevent or report an abusive message, and keep, and this is including keeping evidence with screen grabs if it's something that's going on and happening over a long time. Finally, I think with regards to bullying, be aware that your reaction is probably going to be to take the phone off your child if this is happening. But sometimes the place that they're being bullied is also precisely the place where they're finding some sort of support. So, I think being measured around how you respond to this is key. So, maybe it's not about removing the phone, as it were. Maybe it is about having those conversations with the child, with their peer group, with their teachers, because you don't want to make your child who's being bullied feel like they're somehow being punished because of what's going on. It's also important, that you have conversations around this digital footprint in, I guess, a more nuanced way than you would when they're younger. I think kids, will emote, will understand in the here and now, will respond in the here and now. But actually, there's no here and now online. It's kind of always forever. So getting them to ensure that they don't send something without thinking about it, without showing it to you, at least in those initial stages, is going to be fundamental. Right. 14 plus. Now, at this point, kids' online lives move to being much more independent, but still, you need to, I think, as you would in any part of parenting, look at how they're reacting and feeling, right, to social media, their emotions, what they're aware of, Oh, guys, sorry. Sorry about that. My phone was ringing. Speak about intimacy at this point. Speak about sexting. Be aware of body image, right? So in a lot of ways, I think as a psychologist, if I was going to create a way for a child to feel bad about themselves, I would get them to take a bunch of photos. I would get them to, get rid of all the ones they hated the most, and the one they hated the least, I'd get them to edit it, and then I'd get them to post it online, and then I'd get them to wait. And if they didn't get enough likes, well, then I'd get them to do it all over again. And actually, this is an exercise it's a cognitive exercise in poor self-esteem and poor body image, yet it's something that we see our teens doing time and time again. So editing, trying to live up to their selfies, which they feel they can never do, asking for feedback on pictures, validating them, validating their individuality, their looks. They're basically sort of crowdsourcing opinions about who they ought to be. They're crowdsourcing opinions about, who they're going to please and how they're going to please them. So, having these conversations about not chasing likes, talking about this, getting to figure out who they are based on their passions and their ideas rather than based on how many people are liking their posts is going to be key. If we look at research again, in this area, we know that the kids that tend to post the most oftentimes tend to be the ones with the lowest self-esteem who are constantly seeking that validation, right? So what we want to do is to help them develop an autonomy around how I see myself, which isn't easy at this age because, we're socially programmed to kind of connect with that group. But at the same time, if you're able to ask them, well, who is that group? Why is their validation more important than the people that really know me? Then that's something that can really, really help. Right. So finally, again, for this age group, we want them to be autonomous, but being autonomous doesn't mean that they stop asking for help. So it's critical that you're there. Now, regardless of their age, we need to lead by example. We need to set boundaries. We need to avoid using screen time as a reward. And I think this is a really important one as well. I think the way that we speak about anything kind of, changes its value, right? So when I see parents saying, oh, well, they get extra screen time as a reward, I think, this is probably not the healthiest way to kind of reward kids. It kind of ensures that this is this forbidden fruit. Instead, their screen needs to be the thing they do various things on, the things they research on, connect on, entertain themselves on, learn on. And as such, it's critical that you kind of avoid that and instead, use rewards as other things that you would have normally, whether it's sort of going out or, allowance or extra, I'd have extra books at night with my kid, which was a big one when she was very little. Consider using tools to help you manage the time spent online. I think this is really important as well. So it's important to understand the risks, but also to remember that, there are risks. Just because the risks are there, it doesn't mean the harm is there, as long as you have a game plan. Right. So what is this game plan? Well, I think firstly and critically, parents need to understand and address all the risks to avoid them. So help kids get to grip with the types of risks they might be exposed to based on the website or the apps that they're using. For example, if they're on social media, having a conversation about issues around managing relationships online is going to be key. It'll help them to know what to look out for and take appropriate action for. Helping them to know where to go for help. So equipping your child with the knowledge of where to get support, whether it's a helpline online, reporting tools or apps, or even sort of supportive network of teachers and friends and family. It's important that they know if they can't talk to you about something as a parent, that there are a number of places that they can go to support them. We need to encourage children also to explore their digital world in an age-appropriate way. Back in the day, we'd have sort of these TV ratings, right? So we knew that after a certain time, certain shows, wouldn't be shown, or the certain adverts wouldn't be shown. Now we don't have that. So it's something that, as educators, as parents, as policymakers, we need to kind of, almost artificially put that on so that they, so we need to be up with whatever technological issues are there. But also from their point of view, we need to help them learn to manage challenges and develop good judgment, right? It's not possible to, always help them avoid the risks, but it's possible to help them understand how to take those opportunities to kind of practice good online behavior and avoid things and react to things in a way that's going to be most conducive to their well-being. Because even with the best intentions, there may be times that kids are affected by something they experience. So, helping them assess the situation and find ways to deal with it together is critical. That's the way that kind of they develop confidence around these things. And it's critical to keep on talking, to stay engaged, help them understand the risks, and agree to strategies to deal with those risks that you kind of both, I guess in many ways feel kind of that you can rely on each other. You can trust them, that they know what they're doing, and they can trust you. finally, I think it's really important to create a balanced digital diet. A great way to think about this is to think about what the main things are that kids do online. So ideally, what you want, like the biggest sort of chunk of time, should be spent on learning and creating, with educational games, discovering, researching, finding meaningful content. That great line that was out a few years ago, that it's not about time spent, it's about time well spent. Well, this couldn't be more true. I think most of us would be more than happy if our child was researching something for an hour on a historical concept that they're interested in. I think most of us would have a huge problem if our child was even on a pro anorexia site for 2 minutes. So it's never just about time. It's about time well spent. And the biggest chunk of this for your child's sort of digital diet needs to be around discovering and education and meaningful content. This will serve, of course, to boost their personal interests and their life skills. Now, the medium-sized chunk is about connecting, right? And this is important too. Helps them develop communication and social skills. Things like connecting with family on social media, or even on multiplayer games, connecting over hobbies and interest. Now, this again, very important. It was critical during lockdown. I think it'll continue obviously to be critical. And this is the time where, again, we kind of speak about how do you connect effectively and healthily. The smallest chunk should be about that mindless scrolling, the mindless gaming, and watching videos on it. It's fine to do that a little bit, but we know that that's probably not the best use of sort of cognitive effort, cognitive work. We know that it's not the best thing in terms of a child's social faculties, critical faculties. So the less they do that, the better. So ultimately, as policymakers, as educators, as parents, we need to understand the risks so that we can avoid them. And this means being on top of this constantly evolving landscape of the online world. We need to teach our kids to think critically about what they read, what they see, what they hear. And for young kids, that might mean encouraging them to ask, what would mommy or daddy say about that? So if you come across something, what would they think about that? As they get older, they need to be able to assess for themselves whether they're in a risky online place or whether the information they're receiving is reliable and is helpful to them. We need to think about how communication is different online. We know that it's much harder for people to empathize, for example, with each other when their communication is digital. We can't see each other's faces. We can't see if we're hurting someone or upsetting someone. It's why trolls find it so easy to post horrible messages. So helping kids understand and to pause and think about the impact of things that they're posted online will help them cope with some of the difficult behavior they'll ultimately come across or potentially get caught up in. And finally, it's key that we maintain a positive outlook on our child's use of the internet. Whatever you think of the things that they're watching or, on TikTok or playing on PS4, if you're constantly criticizing the apps and the games they love, they're not going to want to talk to you about their online life. They're going to feel that they're being, rejected or judged by it. So we know that children who can recover from an online mistake can learn and avoid making the same mistake again. So you can help by making it easy for them to talk to you about those mistakes, making sure that they know where to go for help if they need it, and by recognizing that if they're not recovering well, you can step in and help them. Because ultimately, we need our children to explore and take charge of their online lives. Having some control over any given situation is an important part of resilience, right? I can't control what happens to me, but if I can control what to do if something happens, that's key in terms of their confidence. So it's essential when we're trying to help them understand and develop their own sense of what's right and what's wrong online and what to do. Because digital resilience isn't fixed. It's not a single ability or a small set of lessons that can be learned. It's something that every child can have, but we need to evolve this over time, and we need to do all that we can to foster it. So set clear boundaries for their life online, and then step away, letting them explore the online world in safe knowledge that you will be there to help if anything goes wrong. Thank you very much.
Linda, bardzo dziękujemy serdecznie.
Linda, thank you so very much. Communicating to you whatever has been on chat. Everyone says that these are so useful, so hands-on tips, and this parallel to the bike and the free will bike is excellent. It has worked volumes for us. And another interesting comment is that there is an improvement in parents' awareness about what children do online and taking care of this during online learning. And have you also noticed this improvement of parents' awareness in your discussions or in your research?
Absolutely. I think parents are thirsting for this knowledge. I think it's like I said earlier, it feels weird to be teaching your kids something that they were born into and, we didn't, we got later in life, that they're faster, they seem to be more adept. So I think parents absolutely are thirsting for this. And when they're provided with the information and they're provided, with it in a very sort of concrete way, we see parents feeling much more comfortable in speaking to their kids, much more comfortable in dealing with the tech itself, sort of, applying those privacy settings and whatnot. And ultimately, I think they feel much more comfortable with their child using technology because they feel on top of it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this additional comment, Linda. We have two housekeeping pieces of information. We will somewhat change our agenda, so we are going to have a short break right now, and we meet 10:50. So have a quick coffee or a sip of water, and then we will listen to internet to Wojciech Oliński speaking as internet as a hostile territory. If you have any problems connecting, just visit our our Facebook, and you will have a link there which works in a solid way. And join us very soon for Wojciech Oliński's paper.